The King of Podcasts Radio Network proudly presents the Broadcasters Podcast, where we dive deep into the media industry headlines and dissect the digital disruption that diverges the masses into the new media counterculture and away from the media establishment. Here is the King of Podcasts.
Welcome to episode 213 of the Broadcasters Podcast, and this is KOP hanging out with you. I got to tell you, I put out last week's episode, kind of a Super Bowl themed episode talking about sports on TV. And, you know, it is kind of interesting where even I, King of Podcasts, is prone to put out an episode that might not be with a lot of jump or a lot of gusto. It was one of those weeks where it was tough to put some stuff together because, you know, the Super Bowl, everybody's talking about it. I'm not going to talk about the commercials. I did that in the first year that I did this series, but I don't want to go through that now. And I wasn't going to talk about, you know, Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, Kendrick Lamar, 50 Cent, Mary J. Blige, Eminem, all performing at the Super Bowl halftime show. Especially, I'm not going to talk about that when I have a little bit of the time before then and then afterwards. Like, what is there to say? Okay, that all happened. That's great and good. But I thought the part of the sports broadcasting and the way I watch sports was quite interesting. But I understand it's not everybody's cup of tea. Like, I see what my audience is all about, and they're very interested in a lot of different things. Maybe there are not a lot of sports fans out there, and that's okay. But it's fun to go ahead and go to these shows because, like I said, the Broadcasters Podcast, among all my shows, it is a passion project. And I understand that I don't get like the biggest audience with the show. And media shows, they're kind of hard to get that anyway. I mean, there are a lot of big, large, you know, corporate or, you know, media entities that are out there that put podcasts out that might be media related. And they probably don't get that much of a jump. But that's because in podcasting, I don't worry about getting the largest jump of an audience and monetizing it. Is because I like podcasting because I get to talk about all the things that I want to talk about. I mean, for me, I'm a bit of a loner. You know, I don't have a whole lot of friends that I hang out with where I just talk about all these different things that I have going on. I mean, there were some networking things that I had before, but those kind of fizzled out after pandemic and, you know, people kind of got to themselves. And maybe in my mid-40s, it is tough to go ahead and make new friends and friends within the business because with my business, I'm working from home. And there's not a whole lot of events I have in my neck of the woods that's media related for me to go ahead and really start rubbing shoulders with new people. And even if I did, they might be a little bit hypocritical, sanctimonious. Who knows what they might be. And I do kind of like my aloneness. I like being in here, in my studio here, in my home, to record these episodes. And regularly at night, I'm preparing podcasts. I'm producing them. I'm preparing them. I'm scheduling them. I'm booking them. All of it. All my full-time commitment, this is where I'm consumed all with podcasting, which is why I'm King of Podcasts. I rule the domain of podcasting with what I do on a regular basis. I enjoy it. It's what I love. And the fact that I started doing my own independent podcasting almost 10 years ago, coming in December, my interest hasn't stopped. I mean, I continue to keep adding podcasts to my home portfolio. I now have 3, and I don't want to miss a week. So last week was going to be a rough week because there wasn't much in the news to talk about. I didn't want to talk about Joe Rogan and all the cancel culture thing because I think only once in a while is that a subject I might even cover on a regular basis. But podcasting, which we're going to talk about today, yes, it can be. And, you know, once we get some other movies out there that are going to get the interest, like I think next week I'll probably bring up, if not next week, the week after, we'll probably start talking about the Batman. And the real bump to that, because anything superhero, anything pop culture I could talk about. But there are not a lot of new albums out in music. Like the new popular music, there's not much of. I mean, I'm thinking of this year, that's really just stood out. Not much. I mean, Weeknd put an album out, but really, you know, radio does a good job of really putting things out there, but that's another story for another day. In podcasting, you know, it's about, for me, to have things to talk about. Now, there are lots of shows that do self-help, lots of shows that do business, you know, personal grooming, well, not personal grooming, personal improvement, self-improvement, you know, being an entrepreneur, trying to find your best ways to get to certain levels. A lot of celebrities doing podcasts. And, you know, some of the corporate-ended ones I don't want to listen to and I just don't have an interest in. And it's hard because I do kind of try to find things in my niche. And when I look at things that I do right now, And the content I do, I know it's pretty unique for a lot of people. Wrestling isn't. There's a whole lot of wrestling podcasts out there. And listen to a lot of them. Some sports I've tried, and I'm not trying anything entertainment pop culture because I think those shows, when I've heard them, they're better as clip shows. And by the way, that's got to be something to be said. When you see some shows out there, I do better listening to podcasts or watching them on clips via, YouTube or TikTok. One of the things I keep listening to regularly on my TikTok feed is Julia Fox talking about Tony Safdie being the muse for Uncut Gems, and the way she said it, it's like, oh yeah, I was the muse for Tony Safdie and Uncut Gems, like when I'm saying that, right? And the California voice comes off. It's funny. And then I could have talked about Kanye West and Julia Fox breaking up, but I'm not going to do that. I don't want to do that anyway. But podcasting is a different entity all itself. It is where radio is. SiriusXM is not. SiriusXM is hurting in their stock price, if you didn't notice. And podcasting continues to grow. And podcasting also gets its own controversy with Joe Rogan and others. And then the comments being made about Joe Rogan by the likes of Jon Stewart. Everybody's got their own thing. And I've seen enough hit pieces on Spotify, enough to live a lifetime. And of course, the media wants to go ahead and find something else to talk about. They're in the same way. But then I'm also not going to talk about news media because they're just a waste of time. So I'm thinking to myself, podcasting does give me a lot of different avenues to listen to. And as I have said before on this program, I am a big fan of Spotify and their platform. I like their platform. I think when I go and listen to the programming on there, it's great. Oh, by the way, I must go ahead and mention, there is one show that I want to go ahead and shout out that if you haven't had a chance to listen to it yet, anything that is really genre related, superhero related, I would highly recommend the Cape Cast. And one of the hosts on that show is Ricky Bobby, who is a coworker of mine for my full-time commitment at a couple of stations we run, cannabisradio.com, WMR.FM. I'd say go ahead and take a look for that wherever you find podcasts. Go ahead and check out the Cape Cast for yourself and see what you think of it. We'd love to go and pass the word along to that. In the meantime, let's talk about podcasting in general when it comes to Spotify and iHeartRadio, because they are continuing to push forward to get themselves up front and center with what they're doing. So in the first end of what's going on right now is Spotify, because they picked up some new measurement tactics. They're acquiring companies to work for what they want. They picked up Wonder for content. They picked up Anchor for a free platform for more podcasters to go and put out content themselves, of which one of my programs is hosted through Anchor. And there's much more. Now, the latest thing we have is Spotify has snapped up a measurement and analytics firm. They picked up measurement analytics firms Podsights and Chartable. This is very important because podcasting doesn't have the best measurements. Every podcast host does not have great measurements to work off of. When it comes to Spotify, they do a pretty good job. Like if I need to look at my audience and see what I get in terms of, the level of audience I get and the kind of analytics I get from the shows that I do, it is pretty good. Like when I look at my own show and I look at the programming that I've done on my own platforms, let's just look at the Broadcasters Podcast by itself. If I look at this and I look at, let me just put it for the last, last 90 days that I put it out there. So I got a good listenership, probably near 1,000 listeners of what I do. And when I look at the details on the show, I have some shows that do much better than others. I noticed that the Howard Stern Joe Rogan's episode that I did had great numbers for that episode. If I look at the amount of streams I get for programming, that is the most popular show I have so far. Now, in audience, I look at my show and I say, okay, under listeners, if I can look at where it is particularly, I can see that right now I have a 76% male audience, 24% male, non-specified, non-binary. There's nobody added in that. My age group among males, it makes up, what is it, about 77% among 45 to 59, 71% among 35 to 54, 15% 28 to 34, and then I make, my younger audience, 18 to 44, I make up 39, 46, 53. And then among women, it makes up more about 56. No, actually, more like 76% of my audience is under 44 years old. Under my age, which is fascinating. And I think that's very important for listeners out there. The measurements that are out there that Spotify gives to look at the age groups and say, you know what? I want to reach a younger audience. That's what I'm doing. That's what my programming does. And I see the most audience that I have is in the U.S., Canada, Australia, Sweden, Luxembourg, and India. Indian audiences, I really appreciate all of you listening in. Thank you so much for that. Now, anyways, back to the normal set at hand. Spotify now wants to work on getting better statistics. So they're working on analytics firms and measurement firms to help give better stats so they could get better advertisers on. They need to have the kind of measurements that Nielsen offers to be able to go ahead and compete and to do better with. So that's the idea of this. Now, Spotify said that they picked up the podcast measurement service Podsights and the analytics platform Chartable for undisclosed sums. Measurement and attribution are two of the biggest, most unsolved challenges for podcast advertisers. I know that for sure because when I want to go ahead and, I've done a little bit of sales as well for WMR.FM and Cannabis Radio. It is tough because they're all asking, okay, what's your numbers? I can give numbers, but they're never enough because, they think that we're supposed to have analytics that are so good like Google Analytics or something like that. So that's like so broken down, and we don't. Nobody's able to do that because we're on RSS feeds that are positioned and ported all over everywhere. And various podcast outlets are picking up our RSS feed, so we can't really figure it out. Now, Podsights technology will be used to help Spotify's advertisers more accurately measure the impact and actions driven by their podcast ads. So when you get the ads put on there, they're going to find out, they're going to find out the impact and actions. Like the more of the revenue on investment or more of the traction being done by the advertisers, and if people are going to their websites and all that kind of stuff. Then, over time, Spotify aims to expand the measurement tools to other ad formats, so having audio ads within music, which would be the free platform, video music, and display ads. Chartable would be added to Spotify's Megaphone, and they will integrate its audience insights and promotional tools, smart links and smart promos. And they're going to use their Megaphone format, which is their live format, much like Clubhouse was, which I never hear about Clubhouse anymore. Do you? Chartable is fully integrated to the Megaphone, and it will deprecate the standalone Chartable platform. And then Chartable will be made available to both new and existing publisher and advertiser clients. Now, Spotify has been in the headlines because of the exclusive hosting of Joe Rogan's podcast. The backlash, we already know about that. But it hasn't impacted Spotify's broader plan to invest in podcasts and podcast technology, as it believes the medium has the potential to drive revenue for its business in the long term. And so it's a lot of money being put into it. And podcasting, you have all these different content creators being picked up. And now podcasting, with all this here, they have to be able to go ahead and provide advertisers the necessary metrics necessary as best as they can. So Spotify picking up a company that can go ahead and give them as much metrics as possible that can be integrated into their own platform. And when you get that brought into the mix, then that tells podcasters like myself to put the podcast more focused onto Spotify than anywhere else to get the best stats. And look, the one thing that you got to figure out with Spotify is like you also have Apple Podcasts. And when I've done with that, there's a thing where I've had that on there for, I've had my podcast on there for a long time, but I don't get as much of the audience as I would want off of it when I've put it in there. Okay. And I've gone through and I've tried to make the best of getting an audience through Apple Podcasts. The one thing I don't have is I don't have any way for me to go ahead and check out the stats and see how well it's doing. So if I look at the Broadcasters podcast on Apple Podcasts and look at the analytics for it, I can see a pretty good audience that I have on here too. Overall, if I look at Apple and Spotify, I have well over 1,000 listeners, which is great. It tells me I have an audience here, and which is better than what I thought, to be honest with you. And when I look at what shows do better than others, I can look at the trends and I can see that, it doesn't give me much. Like Apple's information doesn't give much at all. You can look at performance, you can look at episodes and their individual downloads, pretty much it. Other than that, trends. It doesn't tell me much. It doesn't give me much either. So that's some of the things I wish we had more. But when you were stuck with these podcast hosts, we need more information so we can advertise our podcasts to everywhere. Until then, we have to worry about these podcasting hosts like a Spotify or anybody else that could be able to go ahead and, add advertising, or the host that we have our own, which is for most of my programming. I have it through Spreaker, and I'm able to insert ads in there to help support the program. But if I could have some other advertising out there to go to work off of, that would be great too. But we don't have that. Not for me anyway. And some of this is also for like their own freemium platforms anyway, just to make sure to get something off of it. And that's part of the idea for them. Now with iHeartRadio, it's a different story. Inside Radio reporting that they will tap Sounder's brand safety tools to make more podcasts appealing to ad buyers. And in that story, there's quite a bit to be said. I don't even know how iHeartMedia has the money, but they do. So the last time we talked about iHeartMedia, they were dealing with a union with WGA East to go ahead and unionize all their podcast hosts and producers and all that stuff because they were not getting paid. That was part of the thing they had to deal with. So Sounder is a podcast management and a monetization platform. And iHeartMedia is going to integrate Sounder's brand safety rating tools for use by ad buyers across the iHeart Podcast Network. Now, as we know, I also mentioned that Spreaker was brought in, or VoxNest was brought in by iHeartMedia, and that's specifically because iHeartMedia now is servicing Spreaker, which is my platform that I use to host my programming. They're putting their ads on that platform. So you might hear some local ads, you might hear some targeted ads, which is fine. And I have that out there for people to listen to, and I make a little bit of money off of it. But what's funny is, through Spreaker, hey, I'm still making money off of it, but I notice I'm not making as much. Because my revenue since the start of the year has gone down. Like I want to say it's gone down about 20%. And maybe it's just because people are not spending that much, or because the amount of money that they're charging now based on how many, maybe there's like an audience metric that they now determine how much a show gets paid. And it's not so much on the amount of listeners or amount of downloads or streams than it is like if there's tertiary levels. I don't know if that's something like that or not. So now Sounder has safety and suitability tools, reportedly offering an easy-to-see color-coded green, safe, or red unsafe rating for each episode, scoring the episodes in terms of how relevant the content is to the ad. And the tool also rates content categories discussed in a scale from unrelated to related. And so with my programming, for instance, as a podcaster, for the most part, I do not use any explicit language on the programs unless I just need to make a point. And for the most part, my content is not controversial necessarily. I mean, there might be content I might have, especially on this program, that might, sound a little bit of an alarm because I am talking about areas that might be considered political, but I preface as much as I can this program is apolitical. So that comes across. Now, Sounder's tools will help steer away a brand from the sort of content it wants to avoid, but then it can also help them identify new places to advertise. So, for instance, in my programming, I try to talk about different issues when it comes to broadcasting that might get more advertisers on. Like, my programming reaches different advertisers. Wrestling will be a different group altogether. And then my When I'm Not Podcasting series, which is a full hodgepodge, could be anything. Like it's just pop culture, water cooler kind of stuff. But it might have some content on When I'm Not Podcasting that may be a little bit risque. Because I'm talking about sometimes sex, dating, porn, all that kind of stuff. Like it's stuff that I notice it's fascinating to me and I bring it up on the show. And because I go in those kind of areas, they might be considered controversial. And some advertisers might not consider to be on my show. That's okay. But that's the leisure. That's the freedom of podcasting when you are a grassroots guy like myself. Now, they talk about finding the right place to put the ad. So their API technology, according to Cal Amin, who's Sounder's CEO, they mentioned the fact that Their API technology is based off a leading industry standard, ensuring brands have a safe environment to put their message next to relevant content. And we know what they're talking about when it comes to relevant content or being safe. So there's certain programming that they do not want to be around. Now, they say it could be evergreen content, it could be more topical or zeitgeist-driven trending moments we believe we could tap into. Ultimately, what we're doing here is helping publishers discover new ways to also find supply within their own content. Now, those kind of things I think are important. And it is a race for pole position to find out who's going to win the race for podcasting to be the ultimate podcasting platform to go to. Because I think that's what we're trying to get down to. Who is going to be the one that gets the biggest audience? What is going to be the go-to place for podcasting? Spotify, Apple, or iHeartRadio? Because they're all acting like their own radio networks with their own programming, and they're trying to get a loyalty, a definitive loyalty or commitment to whoever. Meanwhile, they're taking programming of other shows so they can have all the other shows out there, offering them, the podcasters to be there. But their thing is they want to be able to have the podcasts that are not part of their said network, but then everything is provided to you, but then you're going to stay latched to them because some of your favorite content is exclusive to that platform. So if it's Spotify exclusive, you're going to listen to all your stuff on Spotify. Same thing with Apple. Same thing with iHeartRadio. That's the idea. And I understand where they're coming from with that. It makes sense. And they're going to continue to work on this to try to work more to get into this. A couple other stories I want to get to the podcasting front now. And this is one I wanted to bring up. A Edison research study, the Inside Ear survey that they constantly go ahead and do. They put a study called the Super Listeners Study. And according to the research, they found this. Super listeners, which they are said to be spending 11.2 hours listening to podcasts weekly. So someone like myself, I program it, I host them, I do all this stuff. So people like me, people that are totally into podcasts, and they're talking about 11.2 hours. So that means somebody's listening to at least 2 to 3 hours a day. Maybe about an hour and a half. But every day to listen to a podcast, basically almost 7 days. Now here's what they say. Super listeners spend an average of 11.2 hours listening to podcasts weekly. And that's up from 10.5 hours last year, 9.8 in 2020. You'd think with the pandemic, that would be kind of a flat, not increase. But 51% of these super listeners agree they pay more attention to ads on podcasts than on other media. That's important to advertisers. More important than radio. Because people are not listening so much to radio. Radio, you kind of just flip in and out. But podcasts, you'll just sit on and listen to it the whole way through. And you won't necessarily, break out of it. Because there's very few ads in the first place. 53% of super listeners agree their opinion of a company is more positive when it's on a podcast they regularly listen to. So endorsements matter. 50% of these super listeners agree that advertising on a podcast is the best way for a brand to reach them. And we see there's certain ads that are out there that get you caught up on wanting to go and buy. I mean, for me, I think of the podcasts that I listen to. Manscaped and Dollar Shave Club are two advertisers out there that do not support this show, but I buy their products. Isn't that funny? I really do. I bought their products because I heard them on podcasts. That's the truth. Now, over half of these super listeners say that hearing an ad on a podcast makes them more likely to purchase a product. Again, that's me. And then they also noticed the number of commercials increased and the length of ad breaks in podcasts. 59% said the total number of ads regularly listened to has increased. Yes, even in my show, I increased them up a little bit. Like I'm still trying to, spread them out a little bit, but it's because the money is not coming in as much. So I'm trying to outweigh that. Trying to, play it off. 43% of the length of average ad breaks have increased. That's not good. And that's where some people just need to go ahead and cut down the amount of advertising they have and cut it out. And shorten it down. You don't need to be that long. And sometimes you need to embed it into the program so it doesn't become off as such an ad. That's just my thought process. Their study also said there was an increase in the number of super listeners believe it's important or very important to limit their exposure to advertising, and that's up to 59%. So your listeners in podcasts, your loyal listeners are saying, cut out the ads. That's what we're here for. But remember, some of these, that's just some of the shows that can be like that anyway. There's not much you can do. Now, super listeners also consume podcasts, also include video. 55% currently listen to podcasts through YouTube, 20% through YouTube most often, and second only to Spotify. And some people, super listeners, 19% of them actually discover podcasts most often through YouTube, ahead of recommendations from friends and family and searching the internet. So sometimes we see shows that are podcasts on video, which I've done that myself too. And I've caught a couple of shows as a result, and I started watching them. So if you're doing video like that, get your word out there, because that visual component will get you to listen to a podcast. But then in some cases, there are certain podcasts that I listen to only through video. And I'll watch them. And it's not necessarily about anything else. Like even right now, I did some work here in the studios, and I decided to go ahead and put back up and hang up the green screen that I have in here. I used to have it in a different spot, but then I maneuvered my setup here in the studio. I put my green screen back up, and some of my future when I'm not podcasting episodes on YouTube, I'll be back on there on a quarter screen, and I'll have myself on a green screen, and I will go through the news. I'll get back to what I was doing before. So, according to Senior Vice President Tom Webster of Edison Research, he says that it's clear that podcasting's most active consumers are difficult to reach through traditional advertising, and also are receptive to the right message and the right context and their favorite podcasts. And the industry has an incredible opportunity to be a trusted means of access to an extremely valuable set of consumers. So podcast listeners are willing to listen to ads, but do it the right way. Make them positions so they count, and don't put so many in there, because we want to listen to the content. Like even for my programming, I don't usually put ads out until about 20, 30 minutes into the show. So at least get you into the show, reward you for, just to leave it commercial free as long as I can, and then drop an ad in there, which is usually like three commercials. Well, hopefully 90 seconds. And then get back into the show. And then I'll throw one more later on in the program into an hour format. Try to make it just 2 breaks and up to 3 minutes of commercials. That's it, out of a 60-minute show. Like, I think that's fair. I mean, I think if I wanted to make it 4 minutes, I could do that too, but I don't. I make it 3 minutes, maybe 3.5, based on if we get a 60-second ad in there into the mix. But yeah, if I leave it to like 4 minutes per 60-minute show, I think I'm doing everybody a favor. And I think it's a good rule of thumb for everybody out there, because then it's also more enough time to get the ads out there as well. So that's just a thought too. Now, they also say it seems that the next generation of audio listener, podcasting has become the medium of choice for spoken word content. Not only are people discovering podcasting at scale and through a number of various channels, the super listener is choosing podcasting as one of their primary sources for content. Coupled that with a level of trust and response that podcast advertising yields, you have the audio and audio advertising channel for the next era. That's according to the Ad Results media partner and CEO Marshall Williams. Now, for my own sake, when I think of my regular consumption of media, I mean, I stream a few hours a day of television, usually YouTube, and then I'll go to Amazon Video or Netflix for the most part of what I want to watch. And then there's some other things. I'll watch Stars, I'll watch Showtime for certain shows, and that's it. But I mean, for the most part, I watch a lot of stuff on YouTube. There's a lot available on YouTube. And then podcasting, I probably listen to about an hour to an hour and a half a day. So when I'm out, I go exercise, I'll throw it on. And I have a couple of shows I'll listen to regularly. And sometimes I might even catch like the whole hour of the show or an hour and a half. And there are times I'll listen to a show like, I'm kind of half awake in bed and I need to get up in a little bit. So I'll just put on my Google Nest and I'll activate it and tell the Google Assistant to go ahead and play one of my podcasts. Then I know it's a long form program and I'll just have it blaring in the background and I'll catch some of it half asleep. So there's that part. So, I mean, in some cases I might catch, like they said, like a super listener, about 11 hours a day. Because you can just leave those things in the background. And if you're missing something, you're not going to miss too much. It's good passive programming. But then you know, part of my thing is almost listen to my own content. I'm always listening to my stuff over and over to make sure I sound good. Like, I want to hear myself in case I make myself cringe. If I feel my programming is not up to snuff. Like, I want to always criticize myself and make sure I'm doing the best possible work as a podcaster. It's always a rule of thumb. If there's any rule or any kind of a tip or trick, besides the audio, besides what microphone you use, besides making sure your guests are good, making sure your guests are, you're asking good poignant questions and you're making sure that they're not rambling all over the place. Like, I got a lot of different tips. If you want to look at my King of Podcast page on TikTok or on Instagram, I actually have sections on Podcasting 101. If you want to listen to, I did 30 of them, 30 little minute-long episodes. You can find out for yourself, and you'll see a lot of what I see are pet peeves. Now, one other thing I got to make mention of is, the most royal thing that you could do to help improve your podcasting ability, to be a better podcaster. Well, I said listen to the radio back in the day, but now I don't do it so much anymore. What you do now is you listen to some of the podcasters that do really well. Catch on what they do best. They're not humming and hawing. They're going through their content. Now, some of the best ones, they're based on guests, and they also do long-form content. But you got to say to yourself, if you're not a celebrity, and if you're not somebody that's that compelling, can you keep people engaged for 3 hours to listen to your programs? Because I have a couple of programs I listen to that are long, but I can't listen to all of it all the way through. I rarely do. Even for me, I think if I did myself 2 or 3 hours of programming, I don't think I can listen to myself. I think it's just too much. I would try, but it's a task. Plus, I don't like the idea of listening to a show and then having to go and pick back up where I left off. Like, an audiobook's one thing, and some people, because you listen to audiobooks and you're Audible subscribers like myself, I have that too. Plus, I also have an Audible subscription. And so if I'm not listening to a podcast, when I get done with that, I'll listen to I'll listen to Audible, and I'll catch up on a book. But then the other thing I do too is I got my music consumption. So if I'm not listening to, if I gotta just be doing something else, if I'm running, walking, walking, or just moving around, shopping, whatever I'm doing, or, if I'm driving, I got music on. If I'm doing Uber, I got music on, and I'm listening to whatever music I got in my Spotify playlists. Which, by the way, I have 2 of them. If you want to check them out for yourselves on Spotify. One is Mega Miami, which is a new mix of EDM, reggaeton, R&B, some hip-hop, and whatever pop music might be really catching on to me, which is not much. But there's a good mix right there. Current, all brand new music. And then the other one is Soundtrack of South Florida, which is kind of like an old school mix that has everything from going back to the late 80s all the way to today. And whatever songs that I think are deemed good on the new playlist, I move them over to the old playlist. But then I also try to keep in touch with other songs that I want to add into the old playlist so I can keep building it up. And so far, I have a pretty good list so far. I got about, I'm trying to think how many I got. I'm almost 60 hours of music, and I want to say it's like nearly 900 songs that I have in that list. Like, I work really hard on it to try to find the most music I can find. Here you go, 893 songs. There you go. And almost 60 hours of music I got on there. Now, Inside Radio put out an interesting story, and this is on the talk radio side, talking about podcasting. Edison Research also put out research about podcasting when it comes to talk radio. Among 13 to 24-year-olds, so trying to get new adopted talk radio listeners, more than 35% of their spoken word audio listening goes to podcasts, 16% to AM/FM radio. Podcasting now is twice the amount of time for 13 to 24-year-olds. It's very clear that podcasting's taken over as the most significant source of spoken word audio, and at least in younger demographics. Now, teens and young adults are not news and talk radio's core audience group, but the impact of evolution from live radio to on-demand spoken word audio listening has implications for advertisers. By the way, they're not even listening to spoken word when it's in a music show or a morning show. They're not even listening to it there. They completely left it. They're okay with having their music and their talk separate. Marshall Williams, which I mentioned earlier in the other story, he says teens and young adults are not news and talk radio's core audience group, but the evolution of live radio to on-demand spoken word has implications for advertisers. And this chasm is only going to grow larger in time. Due to large increases in young and multicultural audiences, the report also found that spoken word share of audio listening surged 8% in 2021 and 40% over the last 7 years. And the data showed there are 22 million more people listening to spoken word audio than there was 7 years ago. Wow. Yep. And also they said that the share of audio listening is consistently growing as it gobbles up an ever-increasing slice of the total audio pie. With 3 of every 4 hours of audio time spent with music, 20% goes to spoken word, just up from 20% years ago. But that's also because there's not a lot of new music to consume. And some people are only going to have so much of a tolerance and so much of an appetite to listen to older music, catalog music, classic or like really old school music. And I understand that part. I mean, I might listen to my old school list maybe, a couple of hours a week. And that's about it. But everything else is where it is. That's what I have when it comes to the radio end. Now, there's a few other radio stories we should talk about. I want to transition to that. As I mentioned a few weeks ago, I had these stories from Fred Jacobs and Fred Jacobs Media that I had not touched on, but I thought he brought some good points. And I said, once I get a chance to talk about radio, I figured this podcasting episode would work well, and I can bring it up here. Well, Fred Jacobs talked about why is U.S. radio sitting out the audio renaissance? So when he talks about radio broadcasting, terrestrial radio, the medium continues to struggle against the backdrop of a so-called audio renaissance. Streaming companies continue to create more channels. SiriusXM has expanded its channel lineup, its app, its outlets, and of course, podcasting continues to be a cash cow for at least some of its publishers. And devices for listening to audio have enjoyed meteoric success in the last few years, led by AirPods and similar devices that make it easier and less cumbersome to listen to your favorite content no matter what you're doing. Me, I have a couple of pairs of Beats headphones that are very comfortable for me to listen to everything. I haven't gotten to the AirPods and, the wireless. I've tried, and I don't like them. I see Sony has a new pair now that they're putting out there, but once the price tag goes down, maybe I'll get into them. Then we also have smart speakers. While their growth has cooled, they're still commonplace in millions of homes. And as we learned in each survey that Fred Jacobs does every year, buyers are especially apt to fill their homes with more smart speakers. While they can control your appliances and keep shopping lists, the top use case is still listening to music. With radio, the reach numbers are still respectable, but the passion has slipped. And it's less and less likely to be part of the pop culture conversation people have around the dining room table or the kitchenette at work. CES 2022, they talked about where's radio? That there wasn't much of the CES show to be spoken of. For too many people, it's just there, like a utility. We don't marvel when the lights go on or when the water pours out of the faucet. So turning on the radio in the car mimics those expected, predictable, but unspectacular events of our life. It's simple and convenient, but in too many cases has been blinded by a lack of attention, dwindling resources, and lower expectations from corporate chieftains. And he wonders here why broadcasters aren't embracing the moments that actually jump out of the speakers, reminding us of what amazing radio can be. Not the insane underwear on their heads morning show stunts that add to the embarrassment or even thoughtless but devastating quips by air talent taking shots at women, minorities, gays, and other members of our society that shouldn't have to withstand the juvenile, even hurtful humor of radio shows gone by. Yeah, man talk radio, that's done. We don't need those anymore. I mean, there's other podcasting can take care of that itself anyway. So there's not much need for it. Like a Tom Leykis or Howard Stern or, Bob and Tom. We don't need those anymore. I mean, some radio stations, they have to go and cater to their older listeners, and that's what they do. Now, another story he also brought up as well that I thought was good is because the fact that radio doesn't cater to the younger audience. And when I just showed you that Edison research study, more younger listeners are listening into streaming. And he brought this up as well. Now, when he talked about the starting of the digital disruption, which he doesn't refer to, but that's what I call it anyway, he talked about there was a number of years uncomfortable with broadcasters living in the digital wilderness, pointing out the trends in listening, viewing, and gadgetry. And Fred Jacobs was actually saying back in 2005 that consumption and content sources were changing and broadcasters needed to think and strategize past their transmitters and towers. And then broadcasting or radio actually wanted to see if this was a trend or fad. Well, they were wrong again. Then the thought was our retail landscape won't be impacted by megatech like Google or Facebook. We're in Des Moines. They'll never come here. Well, that's also gone wrong. And then there was also, why aren't you guys supporting radio? Pointing out the competitive reality and truth was somehow blasphemous, even traitorous to the industry that helped launch the classic rock format that Fred Jacobs was responsible for doing and putting his kids through college. Now, he talks about Generation Z, saying that you don't need a consultant to tell you these folks don't have a whole lot to do with radio. Out of 30,000 responses in their tech survey, they said most of whom are members of radio station email databases, 1% of them, or 300 people about, are Gen Z, which means 10 to 25 years old. That's sad. So radio doesn't matter to them at all. Radio defenders will, or traditional radio defenders will try to say it's more than that, but they're wrong. Oh, they'll say, oh, well, they're driving with their parents, where the radio's on, like it or not. But they're talking about engagement, he says. Actually being invested in what they're listening to and enjoying it. So there's not much of a sample size. But there's a chart he references to that says they're the biggest generation of them all, and they're poised for a growth. Gen Z is a prime topic of conversation each and every day as marketers vie to understand its influential cohort of consumers. And each and every day, trade publications and mainstream media are taking on the challenge of understanding Gen Z and ensuring their products and services are aligned to appeal to millions of young people. Well, if they're not on social media and they're not watching through streaming, how are you going to get to them? And if they're doing anything, they're listening through podcasting. Through all they do digital forms of media. That's the point. So now radio is becoming an AARP medium and no strategic plan to counteract the rapidly aging process of radio's traditional audience. So radio is equivalent to the climate crisis. If we're looking at reasons why young people gave up on radio years ago, let me share with you a comment received from a former client and frequent commenter to his blog. He said this, quote, young people haven't been gravitating away from radio. They've been made to feel unwelcome and have been all but asked to leave. When a restaurant takes someone's favorite dishes off their menu, they tend to go to other restaurants. And it's not as if radio doesn't have a cheap and easy tool for testing new formats and ideas. But radio from its inception has been a big tent medium, something for everybody. The mistake was giving into ad agency demands rather than marketing diverse audiences based on their value. He's right. When you turn listeners away because they're too young, they're too old, or they like a style of music that doesn't deliver carloads of desirable demographics, the medium limits itself, becomes more of the same, fails to deliver a diverse audience. If I got to run radio myself, which I did do, I wanted to reach a younger, and that's the one thing. So a Spanish station I was operating, WIRA in Port St. Lucie, was on AM and FM, a Spanish tropical contemporary radio station. I wanted to play more reggaeton, targeted toward a younger demographic, and play some younger sounding cuts at night, just like any other pop music station. But I was up against a salesperson that was incapable of selling to a younger demographic anything. He wasn't trying to get after clubs, anything like that. He was going after car dealers, or going after various other services that would never be targeted by a younger audience, because he says, no, we need to go for an older audience. So play more salsa music, which there's not that much new salsa music if you realize, and if you're listening to any Spanish music, there hasn't been that much salsa music out there. Like most of the artists are really not even putting out much anyway, except for Mark Anthony. Otherwise, there's no new music to add to it, and I'm not going to play an old format because nobody else is doing that either. Like you can add it, and you can add it as part of a mix. You can part it as kind of an old school kind of thing to it, just to add a little flavor at lunchtime or the drive home, things like that, but not as a full-time format. So that's why I was trying to play reggaeton. And he said, oh, no, only play the hits, play the older hits. No. We're not trying to be an older station. And even the hot AC formats, they're playing new music. Embedded with the other music they have, but they're at least trying to play a newer set of music. And I agree with that. So I had that problem with him. And we butted heads. But I didn't mind that so much because I kept trying. And I also had the support of the owner of the station to take my direction and work with the sales team to get it over there. Now, going on in this story, teen radio in 2025 might not sound anything like radio that targeted teens in the 60s or 70s. By the way, one of the stations that used to target a younger audience, which is funny they got rid of it, was Radio Disney. And I remember putting out a story on video on one of my podcasting series, and it got so many people that were just upset to hear about it. They were just devastated. Because Radio Disney was quite a well-run station nationally. And it wasn't doing on that many big stations like you heard on Sirius XM, but otherwise they were all mostly AM formatted stations. But people would listen to it because it was Disney. It had a brand name and it had a good format to it. And then they stopped for whatever reason. How would teens react to a newly designed real-time medium that perhaps led with mobile devices rather than transmitters and towers? So he talked about searchable radio with his team. What impact could that have on how young consumers find what they're looking? And how could technical and programming innovations come together to present an audio option that actually has relevance to today's teens and tomorrow's? So there's also talking about the National Association of Broadcasters, their show. They're going to start taking these sessions and panels along with Joel Denver's All Access Audio Summit. They're going to try to start addressing the youth crisis. Yeah, they need to find a way to continue their future audience so there's a future for terrestrial radio to grow, to continue to be around, to be relevant. But I've been hearing this for years. And now that we're at this point, some 26 years after the Telecommunications Act of 1996, which I've referenced on this program in its own standalone episode, which did very well, people understand that we're not happy with how radio is. It's boring. And they're basically just kind of rehashing everything else. And there's nothing old that sounds young, but that's what they should do. With corporate, go back to what works. Maybe you go and find disc jockeys that are entertaining and exciting. Maybe you could find somebody that could even be like the next real Don Steele, Wolfman Jack, Dan Ingram. I don't know. Larry Lou Jack. Try something. There are people that can still do radio. That's the whole point. You can still find people that can do radio if you pay them. If you give them a reason to go, come on. If you give them a format and you make people go to it. Norman Vincent Peale, find a need and fill it. And right now, radio needs to find a need to fill. So they got to have that audience participation, that engagement. Some of the social media has taken over for them. They need to go and come in more and be multifaceted in engagement. Take their social media and, broadcast themselves on social media. Put their broadcast on there. The music goes out there as well. Do something. Figure it out. Whatever you can do. There's a couple other stories I wanted to bring up before we go and wrap things up. Now, blockchain was again discussed by the folks at Rolling Stone. They said that blockchain technology could have a direct impact on entertainment for years to come. And in the story, they say that funding between blockchain companies has doubled between 2017 and 2020. And spending is about to reach $16 billion by 2023. So yeah, people are into it. They're all in here trying to do things. So they're saying the decentralization of global infrastructure is already underway, impacting finance, and now the entertainment executives are starting to identify how it can impact the business. But there are now smart contracts powered by the blockchain that can influence entertainment agreements, providing a secure alternative to traditional negotiations, ensuring reliable payments to creators, a more seamless way to work with the crew on global projects, and limiting the red tape that hampers many large projects. Yeah, let's move it to Decentraland. Let's get it to Web 3.0. Eventually, that's where they're going to go, and use the currency of blockchain and Bitcoin to change everything. Because if the old school way of doing things, the establishment, traditional way, there's just another level of digital disruption. That's where we are. Now, what does it mean to content creators like you? Well, creators and consumers alike now who did not have access in the past can interact with the industry. Independent filmmakers unable to navigate through the complicated web of movie industry financing can now tap into a vast pool of new resources from major investors and crowdfunding platforms powered by blockchain. It can also mean more consistent returns for media companies that are better to able address piracy, they're saying too. Artists and content creators can leverage tools with a greater insight into how content is accessed and distributed. And Hollywood's already making changes, so the examples are already out there. There's plenty. AMC is announcing they'll be accepting Ether, Bitcoin, and Litecoin for ticket and concession purchases by the end of 2021. Google Cloud announced a partnership with a Canadian startup of Dapper Labs to support and scale Dapperflow's blockchain. There's a new sci-fi movie called Zero Contact starring Anthony Hopkins, the first film auctioned off as an NFT. And it'll be auctioned using Vuele, an NFT film distribution platform, aiming to change the future of film distribution. Then you have other trends where NFT-based transactions allow movie fans to own a piece of film. Cryptocurrency firms like CoinFlip, Robinhood, and PayPal are tapping celebrities like Tom Brady, Spike Lee, and Neil Patrick Harris to drive mainstream adoption of technology. Of course, if you go to the movie theaters, you always see the one for Crypto.com and Matt Damon. It's always out there, too. Just a matter of time before blockchain technology becomes the core way in which we interact with new media. If that's the way to execute it, why not? And the interest appears to be only growing. There only needs to be a need to increase access to funding to diverse entrepreneurs and startups all over the world that often get lost in the background. And blockchain and crypto allow an opportunity for these individuals to come into the limelight in a whole new way. So, if you want to play ball, you don't want to deal with the normal tangled web of red tape that's out there and deal with people that are not going to give you the chance to make your content seen or heard or viewed. Yeah, you're going to find a different way to do it. And now that you have this, more people have a chance, just like always what a digital disruption does is it creates more chances for more people to be content creators. You know, it's like you don't need a college degree. You don't need to go through acting school. You can just get your stuff out there and see what happens. And that's what people are doing a lot. It's fascinating to me. And these are the kind of things they have to worry about. Another story also knows that Paramount's going to call themselves Paramount Global. So Viacom is changing their name, and there's a big deal about they're going to try to get themselves merged or acquired with somebody else. They want to go ahead and start picking up some other people to make Paramount Global a bigger entity to go up head-to-head against Netflix and Amazon and other places. And then, of course, one more story I got to talk about before I wrap things up. Movie Pass. Now there's people talking about it and complaining about it immensely, which I could have told you was going to happen. I still love my $21 a month Regal Unlimited Pass. And tomorrow I'm going to go ahead and watch. Actually, last week I watched the Blacklight with Liam Neeson. He's the new Charles Bronson of movies. I just know that as a fact. This weekend I'm going to go ahead and catch Uncharted with Tom Holland and Mark Wahlberg. That's the movie I'm going to watch this week. And then the week after that will be The Batman. That's where I'm going to get at. And if I get time, maybe I'll catch a movie where I'll catch Death on the Nile, but I don't know if I'll catch that or not. It's just if I feel like it. So Movie Pass is said to be the stuff of nightmares. Vivian Kane and the Mary Sue reported this story and says that it's not a limited subscription. It operates on a tiered system. Customers buying or otherwise earning points they can redeem for movies. One is the pre-show feature, which plays ads in exchange for points. There's no casual ad viewing experience, but the app will track users' eye movements to make sure they're really watching. To sell the idea, CEO Stacy Spikes talked about, it says, quote, what it does is it basically creates a transaction between you and the brand. But this is the idea. Now, New York Post reporter Theo Waite says Spike says the pre-show feature is basically an extension of product placement. And it's just a horrible idea. It's not even close to what the original idea was. So why even bring Movie Pass back? Like, who thought this was a good idea to put this out there? And also, when you already know that the other movie houses are already putting up their own services, they don't need a Movie Pass anymore. That's dead and gone. It's over. Game over, man. Game over. And that's it. So I conclude the show. That's where we're going to leave things today. And like I said, if there's any content you want me to go and just cover here on the Broadcasters Podcast, I'd love to go and get your take on it. You really would. You could go reach out to me, kingofpodcasts@yahoo.com. kingofpodcasts@yahoo.com. Look for the show, broadcasterspodcast.com. That's where everything you can find about the show is at. And in just a few minutes, I'm going to go ahead and hit publish on this bad boy, put it out there, and also you can find it on YouTube, along with all of my other content. Almost 1,000 hours of programming up on the YouTube channel, youtube.com/JBRASCO951. And please subscribe if you haven't done so already. I really try to get myself to a point where I can actually customize the URL and I can get more people to listen to the content, watch it, whatever. That'd be really nice. But anyway, that's the Broadcasters Podcast for this week. Thanks for listening in. Until next week, remember that content is king, and the control of your content is in your hands.
Thank you for listening to the Broadcasters Podcast. Find all the links to subscribe to the show by going to broadcasterspodcast.com. And don't forget to check out the King of Podcasts wrestling program, the Wrestling is Real podcast, exclusively at wrestlingisreal.com.